You were in the center of the discussions to evoke the Emergency Act. Glen Motz pushes Bill Blair to admitting who in law enforcement asked for the Emergency Act. Bill Blair responds that it's a government decision and not law enforcement. Subject of the notes came up again for the meeting, and Bill Blair cites attorney-client privilege as well as cabinet confidence. Looks like no one is getting these meeting notes. Here's the clip.
Mr. Motz?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. Minister, you have just explained to us that you've had extensive contact with law enforcement officials leading up to the invocation of the Emergencies Act. And yet when my colleague, Mr. Fortin, asked the previous Minister, Freeland, about speaking with the police, she said that it would be very inappropriate for a cabinet minister to do so. Which is it?
Well, to be very clear, I was meeting on a regular basis. So I'd established a table of consultations through the three levels of government, a tripartite table with the City of Ottawa, including the Mayor, with our provincial counterparts and my officials. And it was during a meeting with the Mayor of Ottawa, talking about how we can assist the City of Ottawa in restoring order and restoring peace and safety to the City of Ottawa.
Okay, fair enough. So
I had the conversation with his
So I take it then Minister Freeland was mistaken in her statement. Let me get to another question for you, sir. Your government will undoubtedly assert cabinet confidences, which will, I'm sure you'll do for the documents that we've asked for. But as a president of the Queen's Privy Council, and will you release these confidences of the Queen's Privy Council?
Can you be specific on what confidence you're referring to, sir?
We're talking to the documents that we've asked. This committee, as you know, has asked for all the documents to use to make the decisions on invoking the Emergencies Act. And we've had ministers here before, Lametti, Mendocino, who have made it very clear that there's invoking lawyer-client privilege, as well as cabinet conferences and in the release of those information. And I'm asking you, as the president of that Privy Council, whether you would consider releasing those confidences.
And Mr. Motz, I believe there are processes in place to determine, what documents should be and are appropriately released. There are issues of lawyer-client privileges, for example. Those are areas that are well understood and respected. And I'm aware that the Canada Evidence Act, Section 38, also describes quite clearly how it would be determined how information related to other confidences could be made available. I respect those processes, Mr. Motz, and I respect the law.
So, Minister, when you were the chief of the Toronto Police Service during 2010, you had nearly 20,000 extra police officers at your disposal during that G20 summit. That support was provided to you. Was funded and organized by the federal government. Now, here in Ottawa, we had former Police Chief Sully, who testified at committee. He was, and we heard in the media that he was asking the federal government for just 1,800 officers, about a tenth of what was provided to you in Toronto. So why didn't you focus on getting him those resources instead of conjuring up unprecedented use of extraordinary powers in the Emergencies Act?
Clear. The planning around for the G20 in Toronto was a process that was actually led by the RCMP and that took place over several months and at considerable expense of the federal government at that time. All of those officers that you quoted, all of them, frankly, weren't available for public order in Toronto. But that was a planned event, as opposed to this was a spontaneous disruption of public order in Ottawa. There were, by the way, Mr. Motz, I think you're aware that there were officers.
You do know that this was planned weeks in advance. In Ottawa Police Service and the officials of Ottawa,
if I may, Mr. Motz, I think you're aware.
In planning where they should be and where they should fire.
I think you're aware that police services
right?
from across Ontario and the RCMP and the OPP all had been providing, from the very outset of this event, police resources to the City of Ottawa to assist in maintaining a public order. But there clearly was a lack of success in actually resolving the issues that were taking place in this. They were unable to move those vehicles, and particularly at the border crossings, although the OPP and other police
Thank you, Minister. It's my question time. I believe, in fact, you did state on the February 13th to the national media that you called the lack of enforcement in the nation's capital inexplicable. Now, you were at the center of discussions for invoking the Emergencies Act, and before the decision to declare this public order emergency, Were you briefed that it was being proposed upon the recommendation of law enforcement?
I'm not aware of any recommendation from law enforcement, quite frankly. This was a decision of government. It's a decision of the government, and although I think quite appropriately, we have a responsibility to consult with our officials, to consult with various jurisdictions and others who have authority as to the challenges. And as you'll recall, with the act,
if I'm hearing you correctly, then the law enforcement did not provide advice or recommendations to invoke the act, as Minister Mendocino has been telling the country for the last few months.
I appreciate the opportunity to provide clarity to your observation, if I may, Mr. Motz.
I'm sorry, Mr. Motz's time is up.
And that may come at a later time.
Mr. Naqvi, start with Mr. Motz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, the protest in Coutts, Alberta was resolved the day before the Emergencies Act was invoked, and police in Coutts addressed the situations there without measures provided in the Emergencies Act. Further, we know that the blockade at the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor was also cleared by law enforcement prior to the invoking of the Emergencies Act. Given what we know already, was invoking the Emergencies Act truly justifiable, given the threshold that has to be met that it cannot be used, it can only be used if no other law in Canada will suffice?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The resolution in Coutts coincided with the culmination of a police investigation involving the seizure of firearms and a number of people involved in a very serious series of events that resulted in charges now before the court. We also had indicated that we were taking action that I think probably rational people took advice of and left that jurisdiction. But Mr. Motz, to be clear, the dismantling of the blockade in Coutts did not end the threat in Alberta or anywhere else in Canada. And that these blockaders had made it very clear of their intention to continue to disrupt our border.
Thank you. I'm going to have to cut you off there. Apologize again. Mr. Varani, you have